I'm Colin Murray with Live Technologies. I'm the lighting and mod trust specialist on the installation side of the company. Gathered with me today are a group of lighting professionals, and I'll let them all introduce themselves and what they do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Payton. I'm with CL Pugh and Associates. I am the local Chauvet DJ and Pro representative for Ohio, Kentucky, and that's pretty much it.
And well, I'm on mic already. So, my name is Dana White, and I'm a freelance lighting designer. I was also was a professor emeritus of lighting and sound design for 20-odd years. So, and Colin was actually one of my former students. So yes, it's my fault. Sorry.
You're the guy. My name's Dan Boggess. I work for Crosslight, which is the ETC rep here in Ohio. And I'm also a veteran ETCer. I worked for ETC for 15 years as their field service manager.
Jeff Washburn with Harman Professional. I focus on the Martin brand, specifically just lighting.
I'm Brad Haynes with Harman as well, also on the Martin side. I run the product and applications side of things for North America, so lighting nerd.
So what we've done here is I've got a stack of questions here that are just kind of general LED, what makes a good LED, what makes a bad LED type of a question. We're also looking out to you guys to have questions as well. So at any point, if you've got any questions about anything we're talking about, feel free to raise your hand, or if it's off topic, feel free to raise your hand as well. And at the end of this, my panel of judges here is going to decide who has the best question, and I have an award for that person because I like to have fun.
Are you excluded?
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, my questions are all really bad.
Good deal.
So to start us off, if you're looking at LEDs versus the tungsten lights that you have now, why go LED?
Well, I'll start out from a design perspective. Is that as with sometimes the temptation is to compare something to the technology that we're already familiar with, and it's important to recognize that it's not necessarily a substitution. And for any application, I look at it and say, what is it that I need the tool to do? What are my goals for this? It might be a project. Most of my background is in theatrical and concert lighting. If I'm looking to do something specific, I want to find a tool that does that. This allows, and choosing an LED allows me to do something that typically is a small form factor, so it can fit a lot of different places. It's lightweight, and that I can, and it's a multi-purpose tool for me. I can make it just about any color that I want. But I think it's important not to compare that to using a typical incandescent source, because there's still a use for that, but they're different.
Yep, that's a great segue, because then starting from the design standpoint, from the manufacturer side, we have to listen to the market. So we have to listen to, what do you want? You want something that's just as good as this. You want it small. You want it bright. And it needs to be cost effective as well. And so, that's the way we look at things. And of course, the LED technology and where we've gotten to at this point, it allows us to do those type of things and really create those type of products utilizing that source. And then inherently, you get all the benefits from that. So you get the power savings, you get the not having to change lamps all the time, you get the longevity of the LED and being able to make it a smaller type fixture. So absolutely, that's the way we think about it from that end. Chime in there. Buckeye.
How do you look at choosing the right LEDs for a venue, a show, a space, something like that? How when someone comes to you and says, or if you're going out and designing a show, how do you go out and say, these are the LEDs I want, or as designing a space, how do you go to a client and say, these are the LEDs you should use?
To piggyback on what Dana said, I think so much of it is application specific, and I think that's something that we've seen as LEDs have become more common within the industry. About 3 years ago, you would see LEDs, and it was really the early adopters who would grab them. And boy, they looked like LEDs. They just didn't look right in the rig. They were maybe a little bit hinky to work with, but I think a lot of that has gotten kind of sussed out along the way. But I think so much of it is that when you go into a venue, and typically from a design standpoint, you're going to say, how far is the throw? You know, there's not a lot of LEDs that can still give you that punch that an incandescent can. I think that's catching up rapidly. Is color changing important? One of the things that's happened in our industry is Wibron's gone away. And so the color scroller is also going away. Well, and of course, that's hand in hand with LED coming along. And so I think it's really hard to beat that option of having a fixture that can do color changing. And if you can put it basically anywhere because they keep getting brighter, boy, it's hard to beat that. But until you get to a place where brightness really catches up, it has to be so specific to the application. Can it be close enough that you get the punch? I think is really what it comes down to.
And even a step further from that, if you look at all the fixtures, like you go to a typical show or, you know, a lot of installations now, 5 or 6 years ago, you didn't want to see the fixture in the air. It was hidden. But now, especially with this LED technology, it's what else does it do? Because the fixture is very much part of the show now. It's how does it look? What's the unique look of it? You know, everything's a pixel now too. So can that fixture be a pixel mapped element that incorporates with my video? So many different ways along the lines of that to look at it. So it is very application specific, as he mentions. Yeah.
I know one of the things that I look at is, and this has to do with, I'm an old school guy. I started out long before any of these guys were born. And, but I'm looking at things that I'm comfortable with. I'm also looking at things that like I know that, okay, I have favorite consoles or consoles that I'm most familiar with. How does this react to that? What can it do? And does that work for what I want it to do? I'm also looking at things like if I'm sending a show out, I need to make sure that the product is that it's serviceable in the field. I'm considering reliability at the same time.
Or if you're taking a show out and you just don't want to take a bunch of dimmers, and you know that you can take one distro and it can do the same thing.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, because and we all know, even as a designer, I'm still very sensitive to how much weight goes on the truck, because that's a big part of that cost balance. Is okay, so how many dimmer racks do I need, and multi-cable do I need to send out versus distributed power and a couple of lightweight fixtures.
So adding on to a little bit of that, it's something that I'm sure everyone's ran across in here is that you see these new lights and you want to add this technology to your space, whether that be a house of worship, a theater, a concert, anything like that. But you have to go get approval from somebody. What are some thoughts and ideas that you guys have that can help to educate those decision makers on understanding what the investment of LEDs is and what it means to transform into this technology?
That's often a starting point if I'm working on an architectural installation or in a project or somebody that's going to purchase something for long term. It goes back to my original comment, and that's that we want to clarify what their goals are. And I think that really helps to make sure that whoever is making those purchasing decisions, that they're very clear on what it is that they want. So that they feel like their money is well spent, they're getting a lot of bang for the buck, but also that it's going to be doing what they want it to do. There's no sense investing in something that has a ton more features than what you really require in that application. But sometimes it's all, part of our job is educating them and sort of saying, well, yes, it can do that, but have you considered that here's another alternative? Here's something else that might be useful.
And we've done a lot of things on, when we come to it from the manufacturer side, if we're going into a project, I've done several exercises where it's look how much you'll save on HVAC costs because, it's a cooler type of element than, some of these other things, or here's how much you'll save in power in a year by not having as many dimmers or that sort of thing. So it really is that balance of what they want to do or what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think is very interesting in the last 3 years, again, kind of going from that early adopter where people really didn't understand what LEDs were, you had to talk to them about why they were interesting. LEDs are everywhere now. I mean, you go to Home Depot and you go to Lowe's, and the light bulb aisle is LEDs now, guys. And so your purchasing agent, who is, I think, the person that you're referring to that we're trying to sell to, I don't think you have to do that much of a sell anymore. In fact, I think we go in and we walk through a venue. The question is now, how do we get to LEDs, not why do we want LEDs? And I think there's been a huge shift there, and I think it started in people's homes.
Yep, I agree.
So, that actually is a nice little, nice little segue into another question that I have here. Some of these questions I phrased from the end user's perspective, as if I was coming in as an end user. So this one is, my maintenance man told me he bought LED replacement bulbs for our house light system from Home Depot. Is this something I should use, or should I consider an alternative source for that?
No, you shouldn't. You know, one of these guys are much more knowledgeable in this, but again, the thing for me as a designer, the things that are really important is that if I'm going to dim the house lights, I need to make sure that when it goes, it goes from full to zero, it goes from full to zero, that it doesn't jump on at 7% or 10%, or it doesn't do the same thing, it dims down and then all of a sudden snaps out. That doesn't work in most of the applications that I have. I'm working in a theater. Actually, I'm going into rehearsals again tonight. We go to House to Half, and they've got a couple of LEDs that are sprinkled in there, and they're, it makes me nuts. But it's just, again, it's not necessarily a one-to-one substitution. There are,
and they were meant to be. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Speaking of one-to-one substitutions, does one LED par fixture equal one par can?
That's so open-ended too, because there's so many different types of par
I
cans.
told you these are open-ended questions.
Because then you have to look at, like, LED is a source, much like lamps were a source, and even LEDs have now gotten to a certain point where you have to go back and now rely on optics to make as much as you can get out of it, in terms of lensing and that sort of thing. So the short answer is no, not quite yet. It's getting there. There are a lot of fixtures out there made by all of us that are really getting up there in lumen count to be very successful. But then are we just talking white, or are we talking colors? Because then it gets into a whole different spectrum of why the benefits versus or not are against it. So that's so open-ended.
What are some creative ways, or the best, coolest thing that you guys have ever seen done with LEDs in live performance, houses of worship, anything like that?
A few summers ago, I had the chance to meet Chris Carota, the lighting designer for Fish. And if you've ever seen a Fish show, it's obviously a beautiful thing just to see the light show. But if you stand back in front of the house behind the console and you actually look at what you're looking at, Chris is running a full GIF over the entire stage. Everything's pixel mapped. Everything is in sync, but when you're up close, it's like looking at one of those magic eye things. You gotta step back and really take it all in. So there's amazing things that can be done with LEDs, especially with video walls being LED, pixel mapping, and he's a very traditional lighting designer. He comes from incandescent. I mean, he was one of the guys that just didn't want to go that way. He was just not ready. I mean, he just started doing LED panels this year, so he's a big advocate of it now. He knows what he can do with it. He knows the potential. So I think there's a lot to be said as far as putting the whole rig together with different LEDs and different styles.
Some of the really cool applications that I've seen, no pun intended, was for an ice sculpture installation, because you could put the fixtures right up next to the ice, and where typical incandescent was too much heat, and it was really interesting. Ice takes color in a very, very interesting way. So that was a really cool thing.
Yeah, we have. Going back to his point too, is just how all of this is translating into there was already a marriage between video and lighting, over the last couple of years, but even more so, these fixtures are really starting to be the same. It's everything's starting to become a pixel, and it can, which is amazing. So LDI, which is our largest industry trade show, is coming up, and in our design, not to talk product specific, but we have not only fixtures but video panels and all sorts of creative videos, and all this stuff is LED. And it's spread over, we sat down the other day and we were like, oh, we just realized this is 4K. So we have to have that's how big it is now, and all of these fixtures are going to take that type of content. That's pretty cool, that we're actually going to take a piece of video content like that and totally transform the space across all these different types of fixtures, not just a video panel, but all these things broken up into so many different creative type of aspects. That's where I think things have really gotten really interesting over the last couple of years and going forward. It's easy to do now. It's not hard like it used to be.
The coolest thing that I've seen is that the consoles now can really control LEDs well. And a lot of the manufacturers are building in the fixture libraries and being able to do color mapping.
Yep.
And so for me, the really cool thing is particularly at academic institutions, when you go in, and they now have an LED rig, so they can do a lot of different color mixing. And you've got a kid who sits there and can just pick color and mix color. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And it wasn't something when I learned how to design, it was holding a piece of gel in front of a light to see what it might look like through a 1,000 watt lamp, which is very different. And so I think for the learning side of it, for the academic side of it, it's just huge. Your light lab is immensely more powerful than it used to be.
And it's quick, so even taken to a point like a rental production company like yourself, a lot of these fixtures, again, are part of the show, so they do something, and so a lot of us are building macros into these fixtures, so they're quick punt type things. I mean, a lot of fixtures now have 60 plus macros in, so if you go do a backline of LED lines, you can just call up macros and do a show, that's quick and easy, and you don't have to do a lot. Not that, take the art away from it, but it's, it's a lot quicker and easier to do it.
Continuing on with control, one of my favorite phrases that a designer told me one time was, "It's not the console that makes the art; it's the designer behind it." How should somebody who is adding LEDs into their rig look to approach, how do we control those? How do they decide what's the best console, what's the best control solution? How should they how should they approach looking for those things and getting themselves to understand that there's a lot of options out there and a lot of choices that all can do very similar things, and what's the best fit for them?
It's funny because I wind up with this question a lot. I think one of the first things is to understand that there's a difference in the design philosophy of the console. There are some consoles that are made to record and create things in sequential orders. For instance, if you're working on a theatrical show, you're going to start at the beginning of the show, and typically the light cues are going to go in order for the most part. And you're going to build and subtract from that. And those kinds of consoles have, it's a design philosophy behind it, versus in the concert world where things are much more. I think of them as modules. Basically, I'm going to call up this module, and I'm going to use these. These 5 modules are going to be for this song, and then we're going to do something else with that. So. There is not a best solution. There is the most appropriate.
And it's a comfort thing too, and all of them are around the same level. It used to be like, if we were going to sell LEDs, no offense to this guy, we'd go, oh, you don't want to buy that ETC console because that's just a theater console. You don't want to buy that. And they would say, oh, you don't want to buy that console because it's a rock and roll console. Not anymore. I mean, it's all the same thing, and it just comes to what are you comfortable with? Like, what's your workflow? Sometimes it's even that before you pick a console, because it's like, what's my workflow in relation to what this console does is the one I pick. It's whatever you're fastest on. Whatever
and sometimes we'll blend them together.
Yeah, absolutely.
There may be something where like this works really well for my conventional
Yeah.
fixtures. This works, this works really well for for my intelligent fixtures. And so let's put them together. Let's let's make them up that way.
And you also now have a generation who's grown up in a product line. So, and the lines are all blurred now, and we have people who are MA users, and they've been MA users since they were in high school. Because MA is now making lower end desks as well. And so it's comfort, it's what you grew up with, it's did the sales rep come by and talk to you about it? It's all those things.
But I would say, especially if there's any younger audience out there that maybe knows one, definitely keep diversifying. Go out and play with all the consoles, because not that you want to switch, but it's nice to know that other terminology or know that other workflow, but also see how things can be different, because it may change the way you do things on the desk that you're comfortable with too. So,
very cool. So, this was a question that made me laugh when I thought of it. and coming from the end user standpoint again, I told my dance director that we got new LED fixtures that can make any color. She asked me for silver and gold. What did I say wrong?
I'll let the designer answer that one.
Well,
Or how can I approach that better? Or what are the main takeaway of this is when you're talking to people who don't necessarily understand the technology out there, what are some key phrases that you should avoid and that you should
one of the things is
educate them?
that I learned early on as a designer, and that's to underpromise and overdeliver. And actually, language, I think, is this is often overlooked because we have to learn to talk about what we do. It's very important for me as a designer to realize that the people that I'm communicating with, whether it's a director, whether it's a facilities coordinator, or any of those, whatever those people are, is that we need to come up with a language that actually makes some sense. And I have to learn to be able to talk about it. And it's not one of those. This is so cool. You're going to be blown away when you got to get past that. It really helps to be much more specific in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I've worked in architectural settings where there'll be a rendering of something, and immediately as a lighting designer I go, that's not physically possible. I mean, yeah, I know you can do that in your rendering software, but that it doesn't bear any resemblance to reality. Nothing reads like that. Yeah. So, I spend a lot of time talking to people about, kind of managing expectations in a certain way. There's nothing that does everything for everybody.
Right. And that's where LEDs have gotten better. I mean, I know we're talking about LEDs, but that question is even kind of past LEDs because I can put a Fresnel up and then maybe put a new LED fixture up and almost do the same thing. And if you ask someone in the audience to tell me which one was the LED, maybe wouldn't be able to because that's how good it's gotten, where technology has gotten. So, it's not just about, that LED won't do that for you anymore. It's this particular thing just won't do that for you.
I want to use an LED fixture to change the color on the outside of my building. What's something I didn't think about?
Power.
Fixture limitations, how many fixtures you can put on one run.
Can it stay outside for longer than an hour?
Who's going to maintain them? I think that's something that happens all the time, and especially on exterior applications. We spend a ton of money, we love it, it runs for 3 months, and then there was a hiccup, and all of a sudden it was, oh my God, why did we do this? Well, a fixture's outside, things are gonna happen to it. There has to be somebody who can maintain that, and hopefully somebody who's gonna be around after a month or two.
Luckily, most manufacturers are making IP-rated fixtures now, which are ingress protected. There's different levels of that. I believe the highest is 67.
68, that's submersible.
Which is, we can drop that in water, it's still gonna run. To be honest, I don't see that very often. I do see it in some casino applications where it's very special. But yeah, it's gotta be rated for outdoor use or you're gonna run into trouble pretty quick, especially with all the festivals and everything that are really big now, especially in the summer. Rain, dust, I mean anything, water. It's all going to get in there at some point, and dragging these things around. I know guys that use the IP fixtures in indoor situations. They just use them both indoor, outdoor. So there's options there for people who do want to do outdoor architectural lighting, but they do want to make sure that things are ingress protected.
And that stuff's much better too. I mean, there's a lot of fixtures that do really well at that. So then the other question is at the beginning is like, what do I want to do? If it's a new build, then I can run control cables and I can plan for newer fixtures to be in it. If it's a retrofit type thing, it's do I have the right power for this? Do I only have 277? Because not all stuff will do 277. That's a big one. And the other part is does it have to have a control cable? So do I have to run DMX to all of this stuff? If that doesn't exist, then you're kind of lost the battle before you even start in a lot of ways there. Yeah.
I'd like to say fixture placement can be a big issue too. If you have sidewalks or or other obstacles. You have shrubbery, yeah. And the other thing is, what's the surface we're lighting? Sometimes as a manufacturer, we'll get a call and they'll be like, hey, we want to light the outside of the building. Well, what's the surface? We find out it's glass. And it's like, well, that's kind of a no-go, you know. So it just depends on the surface. What color is it? You know, white stucco, or is it, you know, dark painted brick? So just the surface we're trying to light is a big deal too.
I think another thing about architectural applications, particularly exterior, because it's usually pretty involved. It means you're going to alter the facade in some way, or there's going to be some pretty massive hardware to do this. But are you really accounting for the technology shift? Because what looks good and looks modern right now, in 5 years, is probably not going to look modern. And as everybody's eyes become accustomed to the latest and brightest fixtures that can do different things, did you now date your building with a bunch of hardware that has to be changed out by a contractor? I'm amazed. There's a lot of people that love to light buildings. I think buildings look beautiful if they're lit the right way. But I'm always thinking, what's that going to look like in 5 years?
Yeah, I think we've all kind of gotten past, seeing the entryway, like scrolling through a series of colors. I mean, you're right. It looks, these days, I look at that and I go, wow.
Yeah.
That's so 80s.
Right. The Chicago O'Hare Tunnel, and I think they've got one in Detroit with all the lights, and you go, oh gosh, this again? Yeah.
But with technology, a lot of stuff that's starting to come out is, again, going back to pixels, is media facades on the outside of it. It's not just LED screens that you see anymore, it's the whole building is a media facade itself. And then you can change the content of those buildings, going forward. So you do see a lot of that happening as well. It's not near as expensive or near as complicated as it used to be, and that used to be what thwarted all of that technology. Now it's really coming to the forefront.
So this next question, I want to preface it in that I sell all of these people's fixtures, and they're all great fixtures. What makes for a bad LED fixture?
Cheap LED emitters.
Bad support. It's not just the product you're buying today, it's what happens in 5 and 10 years. Can you get spare parts? Will that product still be supported by that manufacturer? So it's the back end just as much.
Mm-hmm. Can I call somebody on Sunday night when I'm in tech rehearsal?
Yep.
And then the inside, the guts part of it is how long do I want this fixture to last me? Am I buying something off the shelf that I don't care if I just throw it away in a year? Or do I need something that's going to last for 5 years? That makes a big difference. And does it do all the features that my designer coming in needs? Like, can I fade down from 100 to 0 and that be completely smooth instead of me, dropping off at 10%, to the end? Are the LEDs color calibrated? Meaning, if I'm specifying my rig around this central LED fixture, and I buy 10 of these things right now, if I buy 10 more in 6 months or 10 more in a year to complete my install, are all those colors going to be the same? That's a big thing. Does the company color calibrate? All of those things really do factor in, and that's where the cost difference comes in, quite honestly.
Quality or quantity, and why?
From the buyer's perspective.
From the buyer's perspective, if I've got the option of buying quality or buying the option of buying a lot of them.
I think that also comes down to where you're starting. Am I a nightclub? Am I a mobile DJ? Or am I a house of worship or a tour that needs it to be specific? Does that make sense? So if I'm a house of worship facility and I'm counting all the dollars that I have, but I have to have something last and I know I'm going to add to it, then I'm going to go for quality because I want to continue to add to it. I need it to continue to last, not just throw it away. Maybe if I'm more of a mobile DJ or more of a nightclub and I want the best bang for the buck, I'm going to buy as many fixtures as I possibly can, maybe, and knowing that I can kind of replace them tick or tack here and there as I go along.
I think sometimes it helps to think of it in terms of phases where there may be, say, a small number of things that are sort of mission critical, and and those are the things that it's worth spending some money on. And then there's a bunch of things where, like, I've got 100 feet of space that I need to be able to do something with. I need the quantity there.
That's a great point. Yep.
And so that's an appropriate use of of the tool.
Yep.
You get the thing that fits that budget, and know that, okay, well, so maybe in 2 or 3 years technology changes so quickly anyway that maybe we need to take a look and say, okay, well then, let's build that phase in there. Let's get these now, knowing that that's where we've got to think about that.
Yep.
Customers often buy for quantity the first round. And then after they replace all those, then they go for quality the second round.
Do you have any suggestions or tips to help avoid that so that people are they're not spending money on things that aren't going to last them when they're going to end up buying that?
Yeah, I
more
think
quality
it's
fixture
about
in the end?
tempering this fervor to get to LEDs. And going back to the original statement, as we walk through a theater now and they'll say, what does it take to get us to LEDs? Okay, well, let's talk about why you want to be there. And let's talk about how that's going to be beneficial, not only for how you use the system, but also how you support the system, how people are going to live in the space, if you will. And if your rush is, we just got to get to LEDs because it's the hot buzzword and everybody's asking us about whether we have LEDs, and you're going to go out there and you're going to buy some cheap knockoff fixtures, well, you're now going to be having to answer the same questions to the same people about why do you need a second round of LEDs, and we just bought those last year. So I would say temper why you want to get there, and maybe it's worth waiting another year to save up and get the stuff that's going to last you for a long time. And it's going to be from companies who are willing to support their products.
And that's the same thing too, is we often do it. We work for a manufacturer and we don't sell it, conventional fixtures, but there's been many instances where, we'd love to sell a bunch of LEDs, but we know that particular instance, they actually need to do this and maybe spend money on the infrastructure and maybe get some of these type things before they move into this. Because what we don't want is them to rush into something that they spend a lot of money for maybe, and then it doesn't work out for them. So that goes with the trust, and do your homework, and really, really kind of creating a relationship with the manufacturer as well.
Buy from a trusted integrator, maybe?
True. Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
So, venues who are moving into the LED technology, what are some things that they need to think about when they've gone from an all-incandescent rig to now a LED rig? What are some things they need to think about as far as control goes, maintenance, use, things like that? What are some things that they are not necessarily thinking about?
Well, you can answer it too from when they want to add. Because I'm kind of coming at it from the intelligent lighting end of it, where
I'll come from the theater side.
Yeah,
you got Billy.
And so when they come to me and they say, I need to add a bunch of movers, and say, did you have any movers? No. Well, did you have a conventional dimming system? Yes. Okay. So can we make those dimmers non-dims? Because you can't run intelligent lightings just plug it into a dimmer because you're going to kill it over time. So that's a lot of the time. We have to educate them on infrastructure to make sure that they know there's going to be some upfront costs in changing that system and adding a little of the control aspect of it as well. So power is probably already there, but can you change those dimmers into non-dim? And then you're going to have to run control cable to each one of these fixtures as well. So that's a little extra in the cable department that you have to do.
One of the other things is, I was talking to a group of students this last week, and we were talking about color theory, and it's really sort of changed the way I approach that, because where we would talk typically about, okay, well, here's how our filter works and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Now I start from the standpoint of, okay, let's talk about the component colors of light, and that's a good way to get people started, because sometimes people aren't thinking in terms of how do I get to all of those interesting things that are in there, those percentages of color, so that I understand them more clearly, and once I think of something in my head, how do I get it up there on the stage? So it takes a little bit of thinking about this one thing is going to be able to mix to a whole new palette of colors, and how do I incorporate that into, and something that is off. I mean, this was something that I did. Okay, my mistake. When I started incorporating LEDs into my rigs, I wasn't thinking in terms of how those change my perception of everything else in the rig. For instance, how they change incandescence, because by comparison, incandescents don't look quite as sparkly or quite as brilliant, and also they feel like they're a little more yellow. So I start mixing those things up. My color choices for incandescents, I tend to go into things like color corrections And, and so that when you see one against the other, it doesn't look weird. Perfect example is, many times you walk into a house of worship, and and they've got a really nice mixture of fixtures to maybe to wash the walls or to maybe to light the stage in certain ways and do interesting things. But when it comes to the point where where someone's going to talk for a period of time, they'll go to an incandescent fixture for that. And so you need to consider that, because you got all this neat sparkly stuff here, and then again, thinking like a designer, the goal might be in this, this may be the most important point of getting everyone together for an hour or so. And this moment now all of a sudden feels kind of anticlimactic, or where it doesn't look as good.
Yep.
So you have to learn to start incorporating those and balancing that. Sometimes it's a matter of changing the color that happens before it. Sometimes it's a matter of just doing gelling the incandescence in a different way.
Coming off that, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, are they going to be shooting video? Because a video camera can pick up the pulses of an LED fixture, whereas an incandescent fixture is just straight light. You never see that. There are fixtures out there that can go up to 25,000 kilohertz, so you'd never see a flicker from the LED. So that's one thing to keep in mind is someone going to be shooting video in here? Are pictures going to be taken? Is it a professional setting? Are you having corporate events in here where there can't be any of that? If Wendy's comes in or something like that, they can't have that in their corporate events. So coming off that, it's important to know also that I'm a younger guy. I was born in '86, so these guys probably were doing this way before I even thought about doing it. So to me, an incandescent light, when I see it on stage, it looks extremely natural and it feels right. And I think in maybe 10, 15 years, that'll kind of phase out, where we'll look at LED lighting and it'll feel the same and we'll feel comfortable with it. But right now we're still in that transition phase, or maybe on the tail end of it, where an incandescent fixture, like you said, just has its place in the industry, and it's probably going to stay there for a little bit longer, maybe 5 years. I don't know, but
I don't have that crystal ball, but your point is well taken, and that's that all of these things are appropriate technologies. They can be applied in inappropriate manners.
So, tagging on to something that you mentioned there, Dana, my designer handed me their color for the show, and it's all gel numbers. I've got an all LED rig. How should I approach programming that show?
I'll tell you, the first thing I do is that, and you guys plug all your ears, is that I ignore any of the, I don't care what console it is, I ignore any of those equivalents.
Oh, you should.
Because what I do is, if I've got, I build my own custom color palettes and say, okay, so if I've got this incandescent at this color, these are the ones that are, this is my own version of what fits. And, and I build them up that way. I use those color pickers in a lot of different ways, because it gets me to something quickly, and sometimes that's okay. But I know that that oftentimes I need something that's going to play well with others, and
that's the whole
so
thing,
I create all of that stuff. And sometimes I have a mixture of fixtures in the rig, and one manufacturer's version of this is not the same as another manufacturer's version, or on this console it's different. So,
and often the reason for that is what we do is we take the values based on our source. So oftentimes our source is way different color temperature than what you're used to, and that's why we do it as reference points. So hopefully then you can match. But going back to the last question, that's a huge component. You have to get similar color temperatures if you want to exactly have that match. Because if you have something that's way out of the scope of the thing you're trying to match, you'll never get them close. And we've all seen the hodgepodge. And when it's done wrong, you can definitely tell a difference when it's all over the place.
I think that most people would agree that ETC's layer of light presentation is a great representation of how you blend LEDs and tungsten technology. Without diving into all of that stuff, what are some best practices that, from a high-level standpoint, that we should recognize when we start to add those LEDs into our tungsten rig and start to incorporate the two? What are some things that we need to make sure we're taking into consideration?
again, color temperature. It's not not to plug fixtures, but a lot of what we've even got a few fixtures now to truly get to those type. We have to use those type of LEDs. So, for instance, we do have RGBW type of fixtures. That's one way. But if we want to really get down to that tungsten look, we have to use warm white and cold white LEDs to be able to match that color temperature where it needs to be. And you just can't do it any other way. That's a huge part right there.
I think this is similar to the same question about when moving lights started to be used in theater. Not musical theater, but straight up drama theater, which was, well, is there ever a place for it? Well, possibly there is.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going to recognize that fixture, because it moves, is going to do something that's going to catch the audience's eye, well, you can use that as a detriment or as a positive. If you're a good designer, you use it as a positive, right? I think the same thing goes for LEDs as well. And if you say, I know that my color temperature is going to be a little bit higher, so it's going to be a little bit bluer than maybe the rest of the incandescent. Well, okay, maybe that's appropriate because that's going to highlight something on the set. Maybe that's great for a special. So I think it's being a good designer and being aware of that. And I think that if you're really trying to blend an incandescent with an LED rig, boy, I just don't know if you're going to ever quite get there. I mean, Dana, do you think that's possible?
Again, I tend to look at something as that tool does something in its own way. And how do I apply that tool and make the most use of it, as opposed to trying to make it match something else? I tend to think in terms of, okay, so do I maximize the contrast? And that might be it. I think one of the things that first came to my mind is when you were starting to ask that question, though, is that, this is something that I don't know what you guys are working on these days, but I haven't yet worked with a fixture that if I've got to throw 60 or 70 feet, that really, I usually pick an incandescent for that. I don't know if there's anything out there yet that does it. I mean, right now that's what I'm seeing in the near frame. I don't, I wouldn't be able to specify anything for a theater today that would do that. So when once my experience has been, it's about 35 to 40 feet. That tends to be the, once I get beyond that, then I start looking at different kinds of things.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
You don't get the punch that you need.
Well, and the other thing is that, and this is personal opinion as a designer, and that's all it is. A lot of times I choose fixtures because I'm looking for a specific way that light behaves. For instance, I might look at something where I want a really sharp, clear edge to something, and I'm coming at it at a very steep angle, and I want that. Obviously, when I have a distributed light source, I don't get that same, that same kind of outlining on it, and I don't, so there, that's a thing where, like if I had something like, like what we normally think of as most LEDs, like the ones that are washing the audience now, those don't get the same type of shadow as a point source. So, so sometimes I'll make that choice.
And that all comes back to optics that we were talking about too, because there's all sorts of different types of fixtures. There's the LEDs that could be wash lights, but that's still more of a source type thing that we've got some lensing. But then as you get into like larger LED fixtures that we have, those we're using that as a source. You don't necessarily know it's LED, but we're using that as a source that is equivalent to something. But we're still color mixing using, subtractive type things. Or, So that's where the difference comes in.
Very cool. So we've got about 15 minutes left in this hour. Is there any questions that anybody has? Yes, sir.
Thanks. For a layperson on the concept of pixel mapping, could you back up and like a quick primer for someone who may be completely foreign to that whole thing?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. So pixel mapping is essentially taking a video source image, that sort of thing, and then spreading that across DMX. And that's very prevalent whether you're using a media server. There's consoles now that actually can spit like a small video file, and then the concept of pixel mapping is either, if a fixture does it, and a lot of LEDs do, is being able to basically make that a pixel in this grand resolution, and then have it do what it needs to do video-wise. Even that's changing though, because actually DMX is very antiquated. There's a lot of lag, there's a lot of latency when you're really trying to take a big 1080 image or a big 4K image and trying to throw that down a DMX line. And so there's newer technology, some of that we're trying to do as well, that actually makes it a video type of system instead of just DMX. But essentially, hope that answers your question.
Speaking as the dinosaur up here,
Yeah.
I remember when I got my first color monitor on my computer, and that was really exciting. Okay, and it was, and of course it weighed as much as a shipping case. It was huge, but the thing was is that and being the lighting geek that I am, I immediately got out a magnifying glass and I could look at it. I see all. Oh, look, it's all those colors, and they really are red, blue, and green. And that's kind of what pixel mapping is. In its most crudest form, is taking a look at it that way. Oh, sorry.
But these fixtures make it possible to do things like that, to scale it down way, way, way down and a lot of things. But then you're spreading that over a big 80-foot wide stage. I mean, that's what pixel mapping is. It allows you to really do that type of thing.
And I don't know if anybody caught something that Brad said just kind of off the cuff of DMX not being antiquated. DMX is going away. Next year's presentation, look forward to something like, oh, DMX is gone now. So just be aware of that. Other questions? Come on, don't be scared.
He's going to win.
How many people in the audience have adopted LEDs?
Not
too much, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Carrie, you've adopted them.
How many people would like to? Yeah, okay. I see a lot of people that those hands went up pretty quickly. So that's something that you would like to do in the near future. So let me turn it around and ask you a question. Right now, what's preventing you from incorporating LEDs into your applications?
Cost and changing technology. I've got Altmans in my building, and I've got alumni who are like, here's $38,000, you can buy LEDs. That's funny. I can't afford it.
I think you hit the nail on the head there in terms of when is incandescent going to go away? Well, one of two things is going to happen. The government's going to tell us that they have to go away, which they are doing on some light sources. And then two, the cost of the base fixture has to be comparable to an incandescent. And I think actually you could still have an LED that's not as bright as an incandescent, but if it were about the same cost, plus or minus 10%, I think you'd see them go away overnight.
The other thing is to take a look at it in, I think probably over time, because one of the things that has helped, because it's a steep entry point, I completely understand that, and there are a lot of resources that you can just do a quick Google search, and there's many different places will show you a comparison of the cost-benefit analysis, because compact fluorescents are going to go away faster than incandescents are. I mean, we all know that it's just not in the future, and so we kind of have to take that off the table, and we have to take a look at it and say, okay, so let's take into account energy costs. You got your purchase price on this side. Now let's look at energy costs. Let's look at like color media. If you're gonna be doing things like that, and investing in gel of some sort.
Lift rental.
Yeah.
I mean that comes into play too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned HVAC costs. I think those are things that we have to take a look at it. And it's the part of my job when I get brought in as a consultant is to sort of do the 10,000-foot view and sort of say, okay, yeah, I'm not picking any one specific thing that's going to work for everything, but my job is to put something in all together that's going to and start looking at things at 5 years down the line. For what does this take to replace? And that's not, we're not making that number up. That really is a pretty reasonable time frame for cost-benefit analysis.
It's a great point. I think you mentioned Home Depot a while ago. I mean, you go and you look at a LED bulb off the shelf, and it'll tell you like you'll save this much after so many. It's years, obviously, but you have to look at it down the road instead of just right now.
But and the ones that say, here's an AEP instant rebate. And I would encourage you, if you're looking to move to LEDs, start looking into what rebates are available. That's also a way to get those decision makers within your organization more involved and say, you know, is there somebody in the admin side who can start working with AEP, Dayton Power and Light, those groups to see it? I know that Live has been involved with some of those installations where a large amount of the cost was covered.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. We here at Live, we can help support you in those type of ventures. We try and stay current as much as we can about, you know, large rebates, what AEP is doing and things like that, as well as help you put together that ROI to go make that presentation to your decision makers and really show them what that cost benefit is.
In a particular
in a
application, I was working with the municipality that purchases their power, you know, locally, and it doesn't work through like AEP or anything like that. But the city had a citywide engineer. And we brought them in and asked them to do a power analysis of a tech week and performance for a musical. And, you know, and they put their test stuff on there, and we said, okay, so if we could do this, for instance, and some of this is a little higher level stuff, but for instance, reducing distortions, you know, in your power distribution and stuff like that, you know, which they spend a lot of time trying to filter out. If we do that, you know, and we can change our, you know, our energy usage, what is that worth to you? Because that way you've got those folks on the inside of your tent looking out rather than the outside looking in.
Yes, sir.
What's the next generation of LED, and where is it going to be in 5 years?
Well, I'd like to know that one. Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah,
Crystal
we've
ball says.
we,
It has to have a crystal ball up there.
well, and we definitely are facing that as a manufacturer. Is, you know, everybody's like, well, I don't understand why you can't just pop an LED in that and make this fixture that we want. It's really coming to a head. I mean, Moore's law is there, and that's why we've had to change our thinking, not just on what LED, like, is the next LED going to be this bright, but what optically can we do to do that? Like, I'm going to use a specific fixture that we have. We have a fixture out there that's called our quantum profile. And to be able to even get it to that 800 watt discharge type level, we have to take 90 LEDs and culminate those to 1 with optics. And so that's where the biggest change is coming. So when you do that, though, that's more heat. And so then you have to work on all the properties on how do I make that cool, how do I do all of these things. So it's really that race to re-engineer that technology to get to a certain place that it needs to be as well. Plus, there's newer technologies like laser that's starting to come to the forefront, and it's just going to continue to go to there. LED kind of has gotten to a point, definitely not done where it can't be used anymore, but it's got to be a little extra thinking now to utilize it in different ways.
I think a couple of things are going to happen. One, earlier than later, but color correction is becoming more and more important, not only for entertainment venues, but really for architectural, for classrooms, for meeting spaces, the ability to change what your color temperature is. So, you know, compact fluorescent came out. Nobody likes the quality of light from a compact fluorescent, but they're cheap. You can get them, they install, they immediately save you money, and we all live with the fact that the light was really not that great. But now we have LEDs, and we all kind of went, well, okay, light's still not all that great, but now I can put a cool and a warm emitter in there, and I can mix it. And guess what? I can even change that throughout the day. And there's all sorts of psychology coming out now that you change the color temperature in an office in the morning, and you get more productivity, and then you vary it throughout the day to keep productivity levels up. And I think that's all really amazing. I think long term, and what you had said is Moore's law, so every 18 months, half the price and twice the performance, right? I think that that's probably going to continue. And I think a lot of that's going to be dependent on what the substrate is that the LEDs are actually on. I think a big misnomer with LEDs is that they don't produce heat. Well, they certainly don't produce the heat that an incandescent did, but there's still a lot of heat there. And remember, this is a circuit, right? It's a diode. That's what it is. And so you have to dissipate that heat somewhere. And I know that there are manufacturers working on some really innovative substrates, basically what the LED plugs into to dissipate heat. I think that's the key to everything. And it's not sexy, but I think that's the key to it.
Yeah. Especially, you'd be amazed at like even a LED video panel or like a wall. If it's not 100% dissipated completely evenly across the video panel, then one side of the panel will die before the other side. And I mean, that's a huge proponent in a lot of things, is definitely the heat management, for sure.
So to answer your question, Martin's not going to give us any secrets of what they're working on. We have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am. Can LEDs be used in moving lights in?
No, we're absolutely doing it. We're already doing it. Even the fixture that I just mentioned, it's LED. In fact,